Greetings, friends, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Remy Wins a Lot show. Expectations and excitement. Probably the toughest thing to manage as a game developer these days. You announce a game too early and release it too soon, and, well, you don't give your hype enough time to bake in the oven. And then there's the case of some games, like Final Fantasy 15, where you announce it so early it's not even called the same name. Originally, Final Fantasy 15 was part of the, Final Fantasy 13 mess of games. There are tons of different reviews for Final Fantasy 15 all over the internet, so I'm going to be focusing on a few different topics when I talk about my opinions on this game. And this is a full spoiler warning, guys, for anyone who hasn't played Final Fantasy 15. I am going to spoil the ending to this game, as well as talk about some key elements that happen throughout the game's story. So if you haven't played Final Fantasy 15 yet, that's fine. Go play it, formulate your own opinions, and come back and we'll talk about it. I'll start off by saying Final Fantasy 15 isn't a bad game by any means. If you enjoyed your time with this title, you're not alone. I enjoyed the time I put into it. I really liked the combat system, and overall the world is cool and fun to explore. It's a little too large and a little barren at times, but for Square's first attempt on making a game of this scale, it's really not bad. Thankfully, the supporting cast is good, and that's fantastic news because every NPC you encounter in this game feels a little cardboard cutout-y and about as dry as sandpaper. And that's including Noctis, the character you play as. He's a bit of a pompous turd, to be honest. He literally spends the whole game getting everything handed to him and still finds a reason to be a brooding asshole. I found it very difficult to connect with Noctis, and honestly, throughout the entire game, he was just a vessel in which I played, and that's where some of the storytelling elements for Final Fantasy 15 start to rear their ugly head. The story starts off simple enough, and you're on your way to your arranged marriage when the evil emperor comes to invade your nation and kills your father, family, and everyone you love. You then spend 13 chapters seeking the most asinine forms of revenge instead of just literally doing anything but do what you need to do. No, seriously, this story is just a blip on the radar. In all honesty, the main story itself only lasts for a few hours, and if you were to just shotgun through all the main story quests, you'd probably be done with this game in under 20. And that's a bit of a weird feeling as a Final Fantasy, because this game is padded. Literally padded to the brim. So many of the critical experiences that come from this game happen during side quests, and, well, they're not even well-written side quests is probably the biggest bummer. The hunts are generic enough, and literally the frog quest drove me insane. Yes, you literally have to scour an area and find little hopping toads, all for what is probably the most generic dialogue ever written in a video game. I mean, seriously, did these translators even try at points? There is at one point they even joke around talking about how they know this quest is just going out to fetch something. Square, that's not good writing, and honestly, that's probably the biggest and most pungent point I'm going to make about Final Fantasy 15. This game had 10 years. 10 years to become something great. To give you some perspective on 10 years ago in 2006 when this title was originally announced, that's when Hannah Montana aired and introduced the world to Miley Cyrus. 2006 is also when Facebook became an open to the public thing. I mean, we're talking what feels like a lifetime ago, guys, all to put together a story that, well, honestly feels like it's written and crayoned by a 5-year-old. And no, you don't get points on the story for making a companion movie, because that was just as poorly put together as well. Now, I will admit that Kingsglaive is a visually stunning film. It just adds zero depth when you talk about the overall plot. And even between these two companion pieces, they just don't make a lot of sense. A lot of it feels scotch taped together and absolutely just grasping for straws. And that's not even it when it comes to companion pieces for Final Fantasy 15. We've got 2 pieces of downloadable content to worry about, each focusing on a main character from Final Fantasy 15. And this is another glaring problem. You cannot dedicate entire pieces of DLC to character development that should be inherently in the game because your writing should be strong enough over 10 years to not have to cut entire sections out and penny and nickel and dime your audience. It's just not a good business practice, Square Enix. On top of that, we're supposed to believe that Gladiolus, who leaves the group at one point and returns with absolutely nothing to say and no strength to really show for it, is to go and participate in Gilgamesh's trials. Gilgamesh, one of the stronger Final Fantasy, espers, summons, whatever you'd like to call him in the universe, since the launch of the franchise, and he's supposed to not only defeat him, but then come back and not even share his story. He might as well come back with dialogue boxes that just say, if you want to know what happened, put your credit card here. And the next DLC has to do with Prompto, and that's fine, character development aside, even though this is probably stuff we should have had before we got to the end of the game when some bombshells were dropped on us about Prompto's past, and this is probably going to explain all of that and make it make a heck of a lot more sense. Because when it did happen, I found myself completely unimpressed. We're talking about a plot element that should have had jaws on floor, and I was too busy trying to figure out what the hell had just happened and what they were talking about to even care. And that leads us to the incredibly frustrating end of the game. An end of a game that I had to actually think about for about 5 minutes during the credits to not realize what deep spiritual meaning it had, but what had actually happened. Final Fantasy XV, once again, at the end of the game, assumes that you as the player can follow what happens off screen. And all of your party members die. It's incredible what happens. They all die while defending you during the final battle against a bunch of monsters that you have spent all game destroying. These aren't special monsters or incredibly endgame bosses. It is a field of level 30-somethings. And if you power grinded your way and did some of the extra content like I did, you were far past the point where they would be any kind of threat. And that is a huge problem, Square Enix, in your storytelling. And the ending just puts an exclamation point on my problems with Final Fantasy XV. We're talking about JRPGs, a franchise that most of us throughout the 80s and 90s played through for the wonderfully written stories. It's not because we loved static backgrounds and non-animated sprites and menu systems. No, we loved the characters and tales that you wove into our hearts, Square. Final Fantasy XV isn't a bad game. It just fell under the circumstances that the current game industry is experiencing. The current trends of downloadable content and how to extend that gameplay element is something that's plaguing developers right now. But the honest truth is, a good old-fashioned role-playing game, and especially a JRPG, don't benefit from that business model. There's no reason to cut story out of the initial playthrough, because that story is why we come back. And I'm fine with bonus content, extra dungeons, and cool experiences that are unlocked if you want to continue to play the game. But if you put critical story elements into your downloadable content and it takes months for that downloadable content to be released, you have a game that literally feels like cut up construction paper on a kindergarten floor. I just can't help but feel that the era of getting finished games out of the box and wonderful classic stories is coming to a close. And it's not just shutting the door, it's slamming it shut. And the only way we can get that door reopened is by waving our wallets as hard as we can through a peephole. And that's why at the end of the day, Final Fantasy XV comes with a moderate recommendation. If you're a fan of the franchise, I think you've probably already played it and checked it out. And the reviews were favorable, I don't blame you. But if you came out of this experience feeling as frustrated and let down by Square Enix's storytelling as I did, you're not alone. In fact, I don't think there's a lot of us as Final Fantasy veterans that felt really good about Final Fantasy XV outside of its wonderful visuals and fantastic combat. The game industry is going to continue to change, and there's not much we can do about it. But there are some franchises and there are some game genres that don't benefit from the change into DLC and extra extended content. I hope that this trend kind of tapers off, because I can see that developers are realizing what happens to their games when they leave so much on the cutting room floor for a future purchase. The whole experience makes me very, very scared for Final Fantasy VII's remake, and honestly, if they continue this trend, how many DLC side quests are we going to see for classic characters that we love? Vincent DLC, Yuffie DLC, Aerith, Resurrection DLC. They're already taking enough liberties and changes with the story that I'm not even sure if Final Fantasy VII is going to be the same plot after it releases in the remastered format. All we can do at the end of the day is hope our voices and pleas reach Square Enix, and honestly, I really like this game, and I wanted to love it more than I can say, but there's just so many problems, and there's just too many story elements that don't add up or make sense. And that's all the time we have for today, guys. As usual, thanks so much for watching. And, well, sorry for kind of the new format for this show. And I didn't want to do so much of a formal review as it's been done to death already for this title, but really want to talk about my strong feelings on some of the most glaring parts of Final Fantasy XV that I feel are under-discussed. As always, guys, please remember to like, share, and subscribe this video. And in the comments below, even mention what your favorite part about Final Fantasy XV is. I think there's a lot of good to this title, and at times it definitely dwarfs the bad. And, well, maybe we can send some positive energy Square Enix's way through the comment section. Next week, we're going to be jumping into our time machine, so buckle up, because we're heading back to the 1990s. Until then, guys, remember to keep playing what you love. Thanks so much.